Okay, everybody, brace yourself. This is a long video. This is the last in the line of all of your photo restoration. And it's a lot of review with some new stuff. And it's all specifically related to portrait retouching, because portrait retouching is something very specific in the world of photo restoration, because there's some things you do with portrait retouching that you wouldn't do with any of the others. So first thing I want to show you is that we are still going to be going through the 8 steps in photo restoration. We are going to jump ahead to number 4, which is to repair flaws and scans. We're going to do some of that in the beginning, and then we're going to jump back and do it again later on. So just don't be confused, all right? So in Photoshop, let's go ahead and open up our files. Remember, these are in your lessons folder. And we're going to be finding and locating where it should say Portrait Retouch End and Portrait Retouch Start. Okay, so as you can see here, we've got a photo, a portrait, we're going to retouch. We're going to try to clean up the colors. We're going to get rid of the darkness under her eyes. We're just going to make it an overall generally more pleasing image. So go ahead and close the end file. And then we're going to do step number 1 already in photo restoration, which is to duplicate the original image. We want to do that because in case we mess this up terribly, we can always go back and start again from the end. So we're going to go to File, Save As. We're just going to save it right back to the same one, and we're just going to add the word copy at the end. Okay, that's all we're going to do here. All right, so now, like I said, we're going to jump ahead to number 4. So we're going to assume, actually, let's do number 2 so you get in a habit of doing that. So you want to check the resolution. So before you start your final project, which you will have to do a portrait, is you do want to make sure that you've got a decent image size and resolution. So remember I said you want it to be about an 8x10. That's somewhere around a 300 resolution. Okay, so at 300 resolution, you want it to be at an 8x10 size. Okay. If you have questions, make sure you see me. So the next thing is we're going to go ahead. I guess you know what? We can crop. It's not going to hurt anything. Let's go ahead and crop it now. I lied. We're not jumping ahead. So we're going to crop this thing. So we're going to grab the crop tool, and by default, it's probably set on unconstrained for you guys. We're going to drop this down and we're going to go to 8x10 because 8x10 is the standard size for portraits. So go ahead and pick 8x10, and we're just going to crop out the very bottom half of this. Okay, and we're going to click that check mark, and we're going to go to File, Save. Okay, so now we're jumping down. Let's go back. Let's see. So now we're to step 4, repair flaws, scans, and damage of photo. So we are going to do some of this now. We're going to do some again later. So the first thing you need to know is that when we start on the finished project, so after this video, you're going to get instructions on doing an independent project of retouching a portrait of your own. Okay, so of you, friends, family members, dogs, cats, aunts and uncles, whatever. You are going to have to replace something, so completely remove something, and you're going to have to replace the color of something. So we're going to practice this. We're going to replace the color of her shirt. So with the color replacement tool, remember that you have to pick a color that you're going to swap out. So if we're going to replace the color of her shirt, you want to pick a color that's somewhat dull. Most students will pick way too bright. You want to pick something that's to the left-hand side of your color picker. And because we are replacing a color that's pretty light in value, you're probably going to want to pick something that's slightly darker than what you want, because that light that's in here is going to lighten it. So you can always undo it, but I want it to be a lighter blue color. So I'm actually going to pick something that's slightly duller and darker than I want. And then I'm going to come into my image. I'm going to pick a fairly large brush. And we're going to brush across the center. And if I decide that's too bright, which I think it is a little bright, I'm going to go even further to the left and down. And I'm going to try that again. That's better. Okay, so go ahead and with a large brush, just do the center part of her shirt. Don't do the edges of her shirt just yet. Okay, so go ahead and stop the video and do that now. Okay, so now that you've got the center part of the shirt, now we're to the stage where we'll want to start doing the edges. All you need to know is you need to make sure that you have a much smaller brush. You have to zoom in. Okay, you have to get over the fact that you're not zooming. Some of you guys still aren't zooming in. You need a smaller brush. You also might want to make sure that you have a soft edge brush. So take your hardness down so that it makes the edge a little bit blurrier, so it's not such a crisp, hard edge to your brush. And I want you to brush over all of those areas. Try to avoid the bulk of the hair, but if you brush across some of it, that's okay, because I'm going to show you how we're going to fix that. Okay? So go ahead and do that now. Okay. Watch me work, you're working. All right, so let's talk about these little pieces of hair and things that maybe have got tinted blue that you're not crazy about. There's a couple ways we can fix this. One way is to use that history brush tool. But the problem with the history brush tool is if we've cropped, it won't let us. So we've cropped. So now if I try to use that history brush tool, it's not going to work. And if I close this and try to use the history brush tool, it's going to seal in that color. So instead, what I'm going to have to do is I'm probably going to have to just clone over and get rid of some of this stuff. So I can do that a couple different ways. I can use the spot healing brush, or I can use the healing brush. Either way. And I'm going to sample. I'm going to say I want it kind of to look like over here. And I'm going to increase my brush a little bit. Oh, that might be a little too hard. And you can blend over those, okay? That's probably going to be the easiest way to do that. So stop the video now and clean up any of those weird little blue hairs that maybe were tinted a little bit too dark or too light. Okay, so we're going to go to File, Save, and then we're going to close this thing, and then we're going to reopen it, and I'm going to explain why. So the reason that we closed it and reopened it, because now the history brush will work again. So if I, from here on out, if I do something, I can undo things with the history brush. It's really important. Okay. So we've replaced a color, we've cleaned up some of the stray hairs and things on there. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to practice completely removing something. So I want to try and, as best we can, we are going to remove this strap that is here. So you're going to have to use the clone stamp tool, because we can't just use the regular spot healing brush tool, because it's going to want to keep blending it. You've got to use the clone stamp tool. So you're going to have to clone from an area probably down lower. I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger. I'm going to take my opacity down just a smidge, just a smidge. I'm going to take my opacity all the way back up. But one thing I am going to do is I'm going to pick a very blurry brush. Blurry brushes make it so that your edges aren't super crisp, so you don't get that weird stroke in there. The tricky part is when you get to this edge here, so you're really going to have to zoom in so you can see what you're doing. So I need to still sample. And then I'm actually going to kind of cheat, and I'm going to sample because I want this edge. So I'm going to sample here. Watch me as I do this. Because I want to try to match that edge a little bit. And then as I get closer, I'm probably going to have to go back to a nice firm edge brush, because I need it to have a crisp edge here. And this is just going to take some time. If you do not have a mouse or a stylus, you're going to want to get one. All right. Go ahead and go to File, Save. Okay. So we're going to stay here on number 4 with rips, tears, flaws, all of that stuff. But I'm going to show you an extra step. So from here on out, when we're talking about blemishes and things in the face, not completely covering something up like that strap or completely replacing a color, when we're starting to fine tune the face, we want to do everything on a separate layer. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to drag our background layer down to the new layer button. It's going to create a copy. So that's in your layers panel. So we now have 2 layers. Don't worry, it's just one stacked on top of another. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to zoom in. And we're going to start fixing and touching up her face. Rips, tears, flaws. So the first flaws I see are she's got some little speckles. She's got maybe a little imperfection here. We've got that hair that's in front of her face. So the easiest tool to use is probably going to be the spot healing brush. And all you have to do is click and drag on the hair here. I'm going to click and drag, get rid of that hair, any little lines she's got. She needs to have her eyebrows plucked a little. I'm going to get rid of all those little things. Notice I'm doing it all on the background copy layer. Just getting rid of all those little imperfections. Even out here, like she's got all these little hairs that are floating around on the outside. I'm going to get rid of those. I can use a bigger brush if I want to. Nope, that's too big because it grabbed her face in it. Okay, so we're just going through, we're just cleaning up all those little extras. Okay, so go ahead and stop the video and do that now. Cleaning up all these little stray hairs she's got, just smoothing things over. Okay, you could also use the patch tool if you wanted to. This is why I teach you all these different tools. Okay, so now let's go ahead and let's zoom. We've got rid of all the little teeny tiny imperfections. Let's tackle the dark circles under her eyes. And this is going to be a challenge. So there's lots of different ways we could do this. What would be the first way you would think to do it? Sure, it's dark. Let's try that. Let's try the dodge tool because that's how you lighten shadows. So let's grab our dodge tool. And we want to lighten up the shadows. So we're going to set this on shadows. We're lightening up the shadows. I would leave your exposure way down here, way down, because if you don't, it's going to like make it look really bright and saturated. And we want a blurry brush. So you want to click on here. You want to grab one of these blurry shaped brushes. You want it to be fairly big. And zoom in if you need to zoom in because you want to see those eyes really well. And we're going to brush across. I might take my exposure up just a hair. But you're going to notice, look how it seems to be kind of taking out the saturation, and we're going to fix that. So you're brushing across. It's getting rid of those shadows, but now we've got to go back. We've got to grab that sponge tool. We're setting it to saturate. Keep it really low. We want to bring back some of the color that it took out when that dodge tool came across, okay? All right, so take your time, do that. Okay, the next thing I want to do is we're going to double check. All right, so now we're down to adjusting the overall contrast and tonal range. So we've cleaned the repairs up on her face. We've taken the dark circles under her eyes. Now we need to go ahead and look at the overall contrast, the light and darks, the tones. So how do we do that? Easiest way is we're going to go up to image adjustments, image auto tone. We're going to see if that fixes it. And to me, too much. It gets too dark too fast. So we're going to undo that. Instead, we're going to do it manually. Manually is, yes, image adjustments, levels. And I'm just going to push the dark tones up a little bit. I can take my midtones. I can make my midtones a little bit lighter if I feel like that pushes the midtones too dark. And I can increase the light and dark. Remember, I'm going to hit that preview on and off a lot. Am I making it better or worse? Better or worse? I'm going to say maybe my dark's a little too dark. That looks much better. I'm going to click OK. That's my overall tone. Then I'm going to look at the next question or the next step, which is any color cast or color imbalance. And I'm going to look at this and I'm going to say, you know what, it looks a little too yellow-green to me. So I can try going my image adjustments. I can try auto color, but again, I don't think the auto color works. So I'm going to go to image adjustments and I'm going to go to color balance. I'm going to want to push it away from the yellow because it looked a little too yellow and a little too green to me. So I'm going to push it to the blue and I'm going to push it to that magenta. And I'm just kind of fiddling here. Look at before and after. See how it's just a tinge green? To me, this looks a little too pink. I'm going to pull that down. Before and after, before and after. That looks better to me. And I'm going to click. Notice I barely changed those numbers. And I'm going to click OK. Okay, so let's look at our next step. Now the next step is to adjust colors or replace colors and tone in specific areas. So not the overall. So now we're going to fix just in specific areas. So I'm going to zoom in back on her eyes. And I'm going to say, you know what, I want to make the whites of her eyes a little bit brighter. I want to make the light values in her iris. So I'm going to grab my dodge tool and we're going to increase the highlights. I'm going to keep my exposure low. I'm going to take my brush size down. I'm still going to leave a soft brush, but I'm just going to brighten up her eyes. That looks to me like I went a little too fast. So I'm going to take my exposure down even more, and maybe I'm going to start with my midtones first. I'm going to lighten the midtones. That looks better to me. Making her eyes just a little bit brighter. Okay. Same thing. Now I'm going to switch to my highlights, and I'm going to brush across her lips. I'm going to make her just the lips look a little bit nice and bright. And then I'm going to go back to the eyes, but I want to darken where her eyelashes and things are. So I'm going to go back to my burn tool, take that down, and I'm going to darken right where her eye, that may be a little too much. Take my exposure down a little bit. And I'm just going to brush across those eyelashes just a little bit, just to give them a little bit darker area. I'm also going to make my brush a little bit bigger, and I'm going to punch that shadow that's right on the other side of her cheek. I'm going to make that pop out. And in fact, everywhere in her hair, like kind of where the shadows are, I'm going to maybe increase the shadows just a little bit, giving it a little bit more punch. I'm going to zoom out just a tad so I can kind of sort of see what I'm doing. Maybe I want to do that same thing on her shirt. I'm just going to make the folds a little bit more contrasting. And then maybe I'm going to go back and grab that dodge tool and I'm going to do some highlights on her hair, bring out the highlights in her hair. So I'm just adding some contrast. And then the last thing I'm going to do, I'm going to zoom back into her eyes. And I'm going to grab my sponge tool. And I want to saturate just the hazel in her eyes just a little bit more. Just making the hazel just a little bit more hazel. All right, we're going to go to File, Save. Now, I'm going to admit to you, this to me looks a little fake. It looks a little fake. So here's the trick. Here's why we do everything on a duplicate layer. Because we're going to take this background copy layer and we're going to take the opacity of it and we're going to take it down. What it's doing is it's blending the original with our changes and it will make it look more believable. Okay, so go ahead and do that now. You're probably going to want to take your opacity down to about 80, 85% depending on how extreme you were with your changes. Okay, stop the video, do that now. Okay, next thing we're going to do here is we are actually going to merge these two together. So we're going to right click on the background copy layer and we're going to go to merge down. If your right click isn't working, you can always click on the drop down menu and go to merge down. Okay, so I'm going to show you a couple little things before we are finished with our last filter here. I do want to show you something about some advanced adjustment layers. So let's say we still want to kind of mess with our colors and things and like the overall colors, not specific things in areas, but let's say we decide we still want to mess with our exposures or whatever. You can do it as an adjustment layer. The benefits of an adjustment layer is even if I close this today and come back tomorrow, I can always make changes. So I just want to show you, and you're going to give these a try. So at the bottom of your panel, you have this little button that kind of looks like the Pepsi symbol. It says create new filler adjustment layer. We're going to click on that, and we're going to go to something called Vibrance. So what the Vibrance does is it kind of deals with your saturations and your contrast and colors, and it just kind of punches it. It makes it look a little more punchy. So if I take my Vibrance and I take it to the right a little bit, you're going to see it's just going to make things pop a little bit more. Same thing if I take my saturation, I can bump that up just a little bit more and close it. But here's the cool thing. It's not actually putting it on the layer, because if I turn the visibility of that layer off, it's not really there. Do you see what happened there? So go ahead and stop the video now. Try to put on a Vibrance layer. Okay, so let me show you. You don't have to do this. So let's say I come back tomorrow and I'm like, oh, it's too saturated. I don't like it. I can take that Vibrance layer and I can trash it. I can get rid of it. Or let's say I did like it, but maybe it's still a little too bright. I can still tweak it. I can double click on that. It reopens it, and I can still make it more or less. I can make my changes. I can do this with as many adjustment layers as I want. So I could add another adjustment layer. So I could go to my levels. Let's go to the exposure. And I could take my exposure up and down. I could also do that. I could do an adjustment layer for my hue and saturation. So like I said, the nice thing is I can always edit these. I can always come back in later and be like, no, that's, ugh, no, or just I don't like it at all. I can delete it, okay? So I want you to have at least, go ahead and try with one Vibrance layer. You can try that. That's a nice adjustment to have. Okay, here we go. One more time, I'm going to show you one more cool thing, and then we're going to be done for the day. So we're going to merge this Vibrance layer down. Now that we're perfect, we've decided we're coming at the end. That's exactly the way I want, because we're going to have to eventually merge this down anyways. You're going to merge down again one last time. It's going to seal it on there. Okay, so once you merge down, you can't change that adjustment. The last thing we're going to do is we are going to put a different kind of a filter on here. So we're going to drag our background layer down to the new layer button. So we've got yet one more copy layer. But we're not going to want to sharpen this thing. So we're not going to want to do an unsharp mask filter like we did in the first one, because we don't want to punch anything up. Instead, you actually want to soften portraits. You want to make them look kind of soft and a little blurry. There's no noise here that we have to reduce. We are going to apply what's called a surface blur. So on your background copy layer, we're going to go to Filter, Blur, Surface Blur. So what a surface blur does is, just like I said, it just kind of softens everything a little bit, okay? You want your radius really low. I would say 2 or 1, okay, for your radius right here, and click OK. But we're not 100% done, because the problem with when you get a surface blur is it's blurred everything. We don't want to blur the eyes and then the facial features. We want those to still be crisp. So the easiest thing to do is on your background copy layer, we're going to take either your eraser tool or your history brush tool. It doesn't matter. You could use either one of these. And we're just going to erase through that surface blur filter on your copy layer. So we're just going to erase back through that. We're going to take off the blur, off of the eyes and the lips and probably the tip of the nose. And then anywhere else that you want it to be nice and crisp. You can also use the eraser tool. Either way, it doesn't matter. I prefer the eraser tool. It's just the way I am. Because you can kind of see it looks kind of funny. Because that's what we're doing. We're basically erasing through to the unblurred copy below. All right. When you are done, go to File, Save. And you are completely done with this video lesson. So you've gone through your 8 steps. We did not sharpen. Instead, we used the surface blur. So you're always going to apply a filter at the end, either an unsharp mask if you're doing a landscape or a still life, or reduce noise if it's needed, or if you're doing a portrait, you're going to do the surface blur. Okay, one of those 3. That's your last thing. We've done all of our 8 steps and we're done. Submit this video lesson. Then you're going to be ready to start the project. My suggestion for you is when you're working through on your project, your independent project of whatever photo you choose, I still would have these videos readily at hand. So you might even want to open up this specific one and work through it with using your own photo now. It's going to take you through those steps. All right? Good job. You did it. It was a long one.